Viewers, welcome back to the third episode of the February Anew series. I'm sure you enjoyed the videos with respect to the international and national news and the trends and macros, and a little bit of start off with respect to the budget. Now, continuing from where we left last time, the budget, the other interesting points of the budget was there was a lot of focus on transparency. Now, what do we mean by that is that there has been a reduced dependence of off-balance sheet funding. Now, what was happening as one of our biggest challenges in the recent time has been the subsidy that we give for our farm operations. We buy goods in minimum support prices, which is basically at a cost that will make it profitable for the farmers. But at the same time, we distribute the same goods which have been, the paddy or wheat procured at much higher prices at a lower price through the public distribution system, because here we have to meet the needs of the the lower sections of the economy. So this gap is usually be expected to be funded by the finance ministry through the budget. But in the recent times, in the last couple of years, this was actually kept in the balance sheet of Food Corporation of India. That's definitely not a good idea or good practice, but that is what was happening. So one of the things that this budget, which was announced by Finance Minister, was to bring all those liabilities or the subsidies which are parked in the Food Corporation of India's balance sheet into the balance sheet or the books of the Government of India. Now, this is a very positive sign, because we are no more dealing with monsters which we don't know, but it also shows that the government is willing to be transparent and not make the mistakes which earlier it unfortunately wavered and fell into. That's a very positive thing. So therefore, any food subsidy or any subsidy for that matter will henceforth be available only in the balance sheet of the government and not in the public sector enterprises or any other organization. The second very important criteria in this budget is, for the first time, the government is talking of privatization. Now, I know this is a topic that can have a lot of emotions running haywire. It is also talking of disinvestment, but for the first time, very boldly, they're coming up with a statement of privatization. The last time I remember someone talking of privatization was actually, during the Vajpayee government's finance minister Yashwant Sinha. But he did talk about it, but there was not much of action in privatization. Subsequently, in Vajpayee's government, we also had a minister called Mr. Arun Shuri, who was responsible for divestment. But the word privatization was never used. So it could be that maybe it's because of the waning power of the left, or also maybe the government of late starts realizing that this is something that we will have to do. Now, a lot of the private sector enterprises were nationalized during the post-emergency period during the Indira Gandhi's regime. Now, I wouldn't go into guessing whether it was good or bad, but it did achieve certain objectives with respect to social justice. But progressively, because it's a government enterprise, people tend to take things for granted, and therefore the efficiency started falling, and people started getting into posts because of their connections and not because of their competency. And progressively, many of these companies went into either disuse or loss or losing their competence. So government has come out and said that they are going to privatize a couple of public sector banks, and they're going to privatize one general insurance company. Privatize, period, sell it and get out. I think that's a very positive thing, because governments have no business of being in business. The role of government is to provide policies, create regulators who will ensure that the policies are done properly, and maybe make legislation to facilitate and also spend on infrastructure so that things happen on its own. Its job is to be a regulator and a person who creates the rules and regulation, and not to run the companies, because they just don't have the competence or the incentive to run these kind of enterprises. The second thing, in the concept of privatization and divestment, we are going to see that there is going to be dilution of stake in LIC by the Government of India. It's going to be a mega IPO. So any one of you get an opportunity to subscribe, please do subscribe, because LIC is one of the beautiful and wonderful organizations that we have in India that has got a great reach, and they have such solid systems and processes in place. And therefore, that can also realize a lot of cash for the government. The government is talking of privatizing a lot of public sector undertakings. And very importantly, this time the government is also planning to create a bad bank. Now, what is a bad bank? Because we have a lot of public sector enterprises and banks, and they have a lot of bad debts, which is they lent it to some companies or groups, and the groups didn't pay the money, and that has got accelerated due to the pandemic. Now all these things are lying in the balance sheet. So we have a kind of a hidden monster. So what the government is thinking is to create a bad bank, transfer these assets where the payments or the interest payments are not coming or they are bad debts, and move it to a bad bank and create a specialized unit which focuses on, which has a high competence on recovery of these loans, either through NCLT or through strategic sale, whatever is the means. So this bank will transfer all those things, it will take the risk upon itself, and the profitability of bank will depend on its ability to recover the dues. So that's a very positive thing. But banks will also have to remember that they can't make a habit of constantly creating bad debts and pushing it to the bad banks. Hopefully there was a big lesson in 2008, and then nearly 10-12 years later we are facing the same situation again. Hopefully the banks become wiser from now and don't fall to greed and rather focus on process, so that we don't have to go through this pain again. The budget has also come out and said that the FDI in insurance is increased to 74%, which means a lot more foreign capital will come. Now, insurance sector is something where the net worth of the company is very critical because it's a risk mitigation business. So therefore, the more capitalized or the company having a bigger capital is always safer. And right now we can use this capital for something more important in the country. So allowing well-established foreign companies to come and take the risk is good for the company, because for the country, because it will increase the penetration, and it will also bring a lot more professional services to businesses with respect to liability insurance. Another major allocation which we already talked about is there's going to be allocation for infrastructure. But one of the allocation that is one of the things that the government has brought about is to have a dedicated development financial institution. Now, before this craze of having so many banks, there were a lot of development financial institutions like IDBI, IFCI, or SCICI, or even ICICI. All these were development financial institutions, and then you had the banks. So the development financial institutions generally give term loans, either for capital acquisition or for projects which have a long gestation period. And this is very essential for a country, because if you don't have development financial institution, the long-term funds can come only from insurance sector, because they are the only people who can afford to sit, because they keep collecting premium for 30 or 20 to 30 years for a term insurance, or a risk premium for over 20-30 years. So insurance companies are the only companies which will be able to provide long-term financial solutions for infrastructure projects. Banks just will not be able to do it, because banks are necessitated to pay the depositors as and when the deposit is called. And this budget once again has realized that the earlier change of thought of not having a financial bank or financial institution, or converting the existing financial institution to bank per se, was not a great idea. So this time they're thinking of creating a dedicated development financial institutions purely for infrastructure funding. They are also creating more asset reconstruction companies and public sector banks recapitalization. The budget also talks about forming a suitable legislation to facilitate real estate investment trust and infrastructure investment trust. Now we know that real estate is one of the 5 assets where people can invest, but real estate is dominated today by large players, and therefore the small investors are getting pushed out with respect to investment in real estate. People are still buying plots, people are still buying dwelling units. But to participate in the growth of, let's say, a city like Indore, where suddenly something is exploding, or a city like Nagpur, or a city like Coimbatore, where suddenly we are seeing a huge possibility for growth, a normal retail investor is not today in the best of ability to go and participate in that. So creating real estate investment trust and infrastructure investment trust will broaden the market for these companies to channel these savings into these projects, and thereby providing reliable low-cost finance to real estate and infrastructure investment, at the same time providing a diversified option for investors to get returns from different asset classes. Then finally, the government is also in the same line, is planning to close 2 pharma PSUs, because pharma companies are basically driven by their incentive to innovate, find new molecules and sell. There is a challenge with respect to public sector undertakings, is because over a period of time the competence is lost, and then over a period of time these industries become sick. And so that's a very positive news. The next thing, continuing on the budget, is that one of the positives is the budget has very clearly stated 41% of the tax receipts will go to the states. The government is also talking of creating a vehicle scrapping policy, though voluntary. This will help the pollution to be tackled by the country. So you are going to have a 15-year time slot for commercial vehicle and a 20-year time slot for the private vehicles. This is obviously voluntary, but this can help in two ways: reduce pollution and also increase the need for new vehicles. And the new vehicles will definitely be far more efficient, and therefore the cost of movement will come down. And they are also planning to create a national, a non-lapsable modernization for defense. So one of the things which was happening is defense procurement usually take a much longer period, because there's vetting, and then there is field trials, and then there are international lobbies who are playing a play. So it takes a longer time. So when it was going through the routine budget, suppose there was an allocation for, let's say, buying some armored tanks, and suppose they were not able to finalize that deal before the due date, the amount was getting lapsed, and therefore creating a corpus which is non-lapsable, which means each year's allocation is actually put into that. If they don't end up using this year, they can use it next year. So that's a very positive thing. I think this has come on the backdrop of the challenge that we faced on eastern Ladakh, where the Chinese intrusions took place. So there's some sense of sanity coming into the budget making, especially with respect to defense. Though the capital procurement allocation has not increased substantially, the government, we have seen, is that actually is allocating ad hoc allotments based on the needs that has been expressed by the defense forces. The healthcare has been one of the major beneficiaries in this budget, rightfully so, on the backdrop of COVID. The allocation to healthcare is now 2,24,000 crores, which is almost 224% higher than the one that was given last year. The last year was around FY 2021 was 93,000 crores, and allocation has been done for nutrition supplements, allocation has been done for pollution, waste management, clean air, a lot of these things. So the thinking is slowly moving to clean air, so that there is reduced spending on healthcare. And there is also that there has been a new concept of government thinking of selling and developing surplus land available with central public sector enterprises. Now we all know central public sector enterprises sit on large land banks, and these land banks can be put to good use by either selling, renting, or leasing, and therefore these enterprises will have a lot of cash flow, and the government will be able to reduce its borrowings. It has also announced that a lot more cities will come under gas distribution network, and especially this state of J&K is going to come up with a new gas pipelines. Please stay connected. We have a lot more to discuss on the budget. Please stay healthy. Please stay happy. Thank you so much for watching our YouTube channel. Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that each time we have a channel, you are notified. Thank you so much.